Hello, everyone. Today we're going to have a look at the upcoming Persona 4 revival, the newly announced remake of Persona 4. A couple of years ago, I played Persona 4 Golden out of curiosity, knowing basically nothing about the Persona series, and I have to admit that I became an instant fan. So you can imagine that I was rather excited when Atlus officially revealed a full remake. And since more details about the game have recently become available, I thought this could be a good opportunity to talk a little about Persona 4 and have a preview of what the developers are cooking for us. Before we begin though, please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. And now, let's get started. First of all, what is Persona? Persona is a Japanese role-playing game series developed by P Studio and published by Atlus. The series has become one of the most popular JRPG franchises in the world, especially after the success of Persona 5. Each Persona game tells a self-contained story, so you don't need to play the previous titles to understand what's going on. The most recent mainline release available today is Persona 5 Royal, while Persona 6 was officially announced at Summer Game Fest 2026. Personally, my first Persona game was Persona 4 Golden, and I became a fan almost immediately. I also played Persona 3 Reload, which was equally impressive, but Persona 4 remains my favorite. So what kind of game is it? Well, it's a rather unusual game. It's unlike anything I had experienced before, and admittedly, it's the sort of game that either grabs you from the start or you move on from very quickly. I don't think there are many half measures when it comes to Persona. Even though each Persona game tells its own story, the overall structure is fairly similar. The protagonist is usually a normal high school student who has recently transferred to a new school. During the day, you have to balance your student life, attend classes, spend time with friends, perhaps join a school club, or even find a part-time job. But beyond that ordinary life lies a hidden world. There, you become a sort of hero with the power to fight shadows, mysterious creatures that threaten the lives of the people around you. The gameplay is split between two main phases. One focuses on interacting with people, building friendships, and strengthening what are known as social links. The other is a dungeon crawling phase where you fight monsters in a classic JRPG style. What I find so strange and fascinating at the same time is that you really do live the life of a Japanese student day by day. From Monday to Saturday, you're in school, attending classes and answering questions from your teachers. Then, at some point, there might be a national holiday, and suddenly you have a few days off. You follow the school calendar day by day and take part in many of the activities a typical Japanese student might experience. All of this is surprisingly immersive and detailed. You get much more than a simple glimpse into Japanese life and culture, which on its own could already be enough to attract some players. At the same time, the stories that tie everything together are usually gripping, emotional, and often surprisingly profound. They explore difficult and sometimes disturbing aspects of everyday life, particularly from the perspective of teenagers and young adults. So, what's the story of Persona 4? The protagonist is a second-year high school student who has moved to the rural town of Inaba to live with his uncle and younger cousin for a year. Usually, towns like these are quiet and uneventful, but not Inaba. Shortly after his arrival, a mysterious murder takes place involving a local high school student. At the same time, a strange rumor begins to spread among students about something known as the Midnight Channel. It is said that if you look into the screen of a switched-off television at midnight on a rainy night, you will see your soulmate. Naturally, the protagonist decides to try it for himself, but instead of seeing his soulmate, he catches a glimpse of the murdered student, apparently alive, hours before her body is discovered. Some of his classmates experience something similar, and their curiosity eventually leads them to investigate further. During their investigation, they are literally pulled inside a television set and transported to a mysterious world filled with dangerous creatures known as shadows. Once inside this strange realm, the protagonist and his friends discover that they possess the ability to awaken and summon their personas in order to fight these monsters. These personas are manifestations of a person's inner self. Once awakened, they allow their users to unleash powerful attacks, magical abilities, and various supernatural powers. After several encounters with the shadows, the students begin to suspect that these creatures are somehow connected to the murders taking place in Inaba. They eventually decide to form their own investigation team in an attempt to uncover the truth and identify the culprit. And so the adventure begins, fighting shadows, rescuing victims trapped within the mysterious world beyond the television screens, and trying to solve the murder case before more lives are lost. At the same time, you still have to attend school, pass your exams, and manage your everyday life. Ideally, you'll also spend time strengthening your social links, not only with your classmates, but also with many of the people you meet while exploring Inaba and the surrounding area. These social links are extremely important because they make your personas stronger and provide valuable advantages during combat. They also allow you to create increasingly powerful personas through the Velvet Room's fusion system. And if you invest enough time into them, you may eventually be able to create some truly extraordinary and rare personas combinations. Now, Persona 4 Golden is still perfectly playable today, but it does feel a little dated, especially if you've already played Persona 5 Royal or Persona 3 Reload. Those more recent titles introduced significant improvements to the user interface, exploration, and combat. So I was particularly excited when Atlus announced Persona 4 Revival and confirmed that it would be a full remake built from the ground up, rather than a simple remaster. So what exactly are we getting with Persona 4 Revival? First of all, the game is being developed using Unreal Engine 5, which should allow for a much more detailed and visually impressive version of Inaba. It also appears that the camera work has been reworked quite extensively. Many scenes seem to be framed much more closely to the characters, with dynamic camera movements that give conversations a more cinematic feel. Exploration has changed as well. Instead of relying on distant, fixed camera angles, the camera now follows your character more naturally as you move through the town. Not only does this help showcase the improved visuals, but it should also make the world feel more immersive and alive. Another welcome improvement is that much more of the dialogue appears to be fully voiced. It also seems that Atlus has added new scenes and more character interactions. Unfortunately, however, the original English cast was not brought back for this remake, and every major character has received a new voice actor. Some longtime fans are understandably disappointed by that decision, and I can certainly sympathize with them. Personally, though, based on the previews shown so far, I think the new cast sounds quite good and captures the spirit of the original characters surprisingly well. If you played the original game, I'd say the most noticeable improvements will probably be found in the user interface and combat systems. From the footage Atlus has shared, it's clear that the menus now look far more modern, polished, and easier to navigate. That was badly needed, because Persona 4 can actually be a fairly complex game beneath its relaxed appearance. You need to keep track of stats, social links, equipment, personas, quests, dungeon progress, the school calendar, and much more. That's quite a lot to manage. More than just a visual makeover was needed, and from what we've seen so far, Atlus seems to be following many of the design improvements introduced in Persona 5 Royal and Persona 3 Reload, and that's probably a very good thing. At the same time, I would argue the dungeon exploration was one of the weaker aspects of the original Persona 4. The dungeons could become repetitive after a while, and the combat occasionally felt a little slow. So, this is another area where significant improvements are both welcome and necessary. Based on the footage we've seen so far, the dungeons appear more varied and potentially more interesting to explore. Atlus has also introduced additional combat and exploration mechanics that should help make encounters flow more smoothly. For example, now you have a guard move. If you are attacked first by a shadow, you can guard and counterattack, therefore turning the initial disadvantage in your favor. At the same time, players will be able to ambush enemies, gaining the initiative at the start of the combat and ending battles much more quickly. Small changes like these may not sound revolutionary, but they can make a huge difference over the course of a 60 or 80-hour game. To make turn-based combat more dynamic and less repetitive, Atlus appears to have introduced new mechanics, some borrowed from Persona 5 Royal and Persona 3 Reload, and some completely new. First of all, if you exploit an enemy's elemental weakness, you can knock it down and gain an additional turn. If every enemy on the battlefield is knocked down, you can then trigger an all-out attack. During an all-out attack, the entire party joins forces and unleashes a powerful, combined assault against all enemies at once. In many cases, that is enough to end the battle immediately. Another welcome addition is the baton pass mechanic. This is particularly useful when trying to knock down multiple enemies and set up an all-out attack. Imagine that there are two monsters on the battlefield. One is weak to fire and the other is weak to ice. Your current character casts a fire spell and knocks down the first enemy. As a reward, you gain an extra turn. However, your current character doesn't have access to ice spells. Fortunately, another member of your team does, so you pass the turn to them using baton pass. They exploit the second enemy's weakness, knock it down as well, and voila, every enemy is incapacitated. At that point, the all-out attack becomes available. It's a simple mechanic, but it adds a surprising amount of strategy and flexibility to combat. But there's more. Atlus has also showcased the send them flying mechanic. This allows players to launch enemies into one another, spreading ailments, effects, and creating additional tactical opportunities during battle. It's another tool that will help players to keep control of the battle or turn the tide if necessary. And finally, there is the new prime time mechanic. As you fight, a special gauge gradually fills up. Once it reaches its maximum level, you can unleash an extremely powerful attack. This attack will ignore enemy resistances and immunities while costing no spell power at all. If all these improvements come together successfully, the dungeon-crawling portion of Persona 4 may end up being significantly more enjoyable than it was in the original game. Based on everything Atlus has shown so far, Persona 4 Revival is shaping up to be a very promising remake. It seems to preserve everything that made the original special, while modernizing many of the areas that have inevitably aged over the years. Personally, I'm particularly curious to see how the new presentation, voice acting, and combat systems come together once the game is finally released. And who knows? It might even become the definitive way to experience Persona 4. But of course, we'll have to wait until February 18th, 2027 to find out. And now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever played a Persona game before? If so, which one is your favorite? And are you excited about Persona 4 Revival? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.